Hey, so I chose the topic stem cell research. I think this is really interesting, and I'm really excited that I got this topic and that I get to share this with you guys. So before we start, I just want to know, I want you to think about this. Do you know what a stem cell is already? Do you know what it does? And do you know that there's different types? Do you understand what happens when you harvest the stem cells? And I want you to think about your opinion on whether or not you think this research is ethical. And if you don't have an opinion on it, or if you don't really know much about it, I hope this educates you enough so you can have an opinion. So before we get into the ethical stuff and the legal aspects of it, you kind of have to explain what stem cells are. So I have a kind of complex definition at the top, but to put it into basic terms, a stem cell is a cell with a unique ability to develop into specialized cell types in the body. In the future, they may be used to replace cells and tissues that have been damaged or lost to disease. So here's just a basic picture of what stem cells look like. And to just explain a little more what stem cells are and what they do, under the right conditions in the body or a lab, stem cells divide to form more cells called daughter cells. These daughter cells either become new stem cells through self-renewal or become specialized cells through differentiation, which I'll explain what those are in a minute, with a more specific function, such as blood cells, brain cells, heart muscle cells, or bone cells. And no other cell in the body has a natural ability to generate new cell types, so I think that's pretty interesting. It makes stem cells really unique. And this puts it in probably the most basic terms that you could. A stem cell has two jobs or two characteristics to it. They self-renewal through duplicating, or they specialize into different types of cells to help out in the body. And this just reinforces the idea that stem cells can turn into different cells in the body. So there are different types of stem cells. There's embryonic and somatic. Embryonic stem cells are pluripotent stem cells, which I'll explain what those are in a minute as well, derived from the inner cell mass of a blastocyst in early stage pre-implantation embryo. And then somatic cells, which are also adult cells, they're the same thing, you'll hear me say both, are undifferentiated cells, which means they can't specialize, found throughout the body after development that multiply by cell division to replenish dying cells and regenerate damaged tissues. And right here, like it says, they're also known as somatic cells, like they're the same thing as adult cells. And then there's 4 different types or kind of jobs that these stem cells can have. So totipotent cells, these cells are one of the most important stem cells because they have the potential to develop into any cell found in the human body. And then pluripotent cells, this type of cell is one of the types of cells in the body that are self-replicating, are derived from human embryos or human fetal tissue, and are known to develop into cells and tissue of 3 primary germ layers. And then 2 more, multipotent cells. These cells have the capacity to self-renew by dividing and to develop into multiple specialized cell types present in a specific tissue or organ. And most adult or somatic stem cells are multipotent cells. And unipotent cells, these are cells that can differentiate along only one lineage or one type of cell. And in comparison to other cell types, they have the lowest differentiation potential. So now to get into the process of stem cells being harvested and what they're used for. So embryonic stem cells can be harvested by destroying a human embryo in a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer. In this procedure, the nucleus is removed from a somatic cell and is implanted into a donor egg that also had its nucleus removed. So to put this in very basic terms, the egg cell acts as if it's been fertilized, and it creates and has its own data. And after stimulation, it divides just like a normal fertilized egg would before forming an embryo. Cells from the inner cell are taken out and are grown to provide embryonic stem cells, but this technique destroys the human embryo, which is why this is like an ethical problem. And this process can generate healthy cells to replace diseased cells. These cells can also be guided into becoming specific cells that can be used to regenerate and repair diseased or damaged tissue, which is why some people think this is really beneficial. And this is just a really basic picture of the process of stem cells being harvested. So a small amount of fat is taken from your waist area, and then the stem cells are separated from the fat cells, and then your stem cells are activated with laser and PRP, and then the activated stem cells are returned back to you through an IV. So there are definitely some benefits to this procedure. I'm going to talk about this. Stem cell therapy, also known as regenerative medicine, repairs the response of diseased, dysfunctional, or injured tissue using stem cells or their derivatives. It is the next chapter in organ transplantation and uses cells instead of donor organs, which obviously organs are very limited in supply. Researchers grow stem cells in a lab. These stem cells are manipulated to specialize into specific types of cells, such as heart muscle cells, blood cells, or nerve cells. Kind of reiterating what I said earlier, the specialized cells can then be implanted into a person. So for example, just to kind of explain this a little better, if someone has heart disease, then cells could be injected into the heart muscle. The healthy transplanted heart muscle cells could then contribute to repairing defective heart muscle. And researchers have shown that adult bone marrow cells guided to become heart-like cells can repair heart tissue in people, and more research is ongoing. So obviously this can be very beneficial to someone. And with any surgery or medical procedure, there are obviously things that can go wrong and there are drawbacks. Basically, embryonic stem cells can grow irregular or specialize in different cell types spontaneously. Embryonic stem cells might also trigger an immune response in which the recipient's body attacks the stem cells as foreign invaders, or the stem cells might simply fail to function. And researchers are still trying to figure this out and why this happens. So which is more successful, embryonic or somatic stem cells? Embryonic stem cells tend to be the more successful because they can become all cell types of the body since they're pluripotent, which like I said earlier, this means that they can self-replicate, and so there's more of them and they're more likely to become successful. And somatic or adult stem cells are more limited to differentiating into different cell types of their tissue organs, so they're less successful. Now we're going to get into the legal aspects of this research. So in the United States, federal policy regarding stem cell research has evolved over time as different presidents have taken office. It's really important to note that no federal regulation has ever explicitly banned stem cell research in the United States, but regulations have been placed restrictions on public funding, and certain states have the right and have placed bans on the creation or destruction of human embryos for medical research. So just to give an example of this, President George W. Bush in 2001 approved a law that would provide federal funding for limited research on embryonic stem cells. However, the research had to fit this criteria listed here. The harvesting process, which includes the destruction of the embryo, was started before 9 p.m. on August 9, 2001. The stem cells were obtained from an embryo that was created for reproductive purposes and was no longer needed. Informed consent was obtained from the donation of the embryo, and the donation did not involve financial reward. And then in 2009, President Obama revoked this statement, and he removed the restrictions on federal funding for stem cell research. This allowed the NIH to begin funding research that uses embryonic stem cells. The NIH published guidelines to establish the policy under which it would fund research, and the guidelines were written to help make sure that all NIH-funded research on human stem cells is morally responsible and scientifically relevant. So they would only fund it if it was relevant. They wouldn't fund something that didn't have a good purpose. So what kind of research can receive federal funding? Basically, like I said, stem cell research is funded by NIH, and they have a budget. They don't budget by category. They budget based on, and the amount that they can give changes every year, and it's based off science and the projects that are happening in that moment, and just like how much the NIH like currently has and what they can put into. Individual research projects can be included in multiple categories. So basically, if it fits under the NIH terms and it fits under the current federal laws, then a certain amount can possibly be funded under a process. So now we're going to get into the ethical arguments of this research. So supporters of stem cell research feel that using cells from these surplus of cells for research and developing medical treatments, which could help improve and save people's lives, is much better than throwing them away. So basically, to get a few bullet points, different diseases can be treated with stem cells by replacing damaged tissue. This research gives an endless amount of potential for scientists to learn more about human growth and cell development. There's a possible potential in embryonic treatment, which basically the stage of pregnancy is when many birth defects or other potential issues start to begin. So studying embryonic stem cells possibly could lead to a better understanding of how embryos develop and maybe even lead to treatments that can identify and address potential problems. Now, the moral arguments against stem cell research. Some people see destroying a blastocyst for its cells as destroying an unborn child. Every year, clinics create many blastocysts that are destroyed because they're made in surplus. So basically, a bunch of them are just going to waste. It's really not easy to obtain stem cells. Once harvested from an embryo, stem cells require several months of growth before they can be used. And it can be really painful. It's a surgery. It's hard. Stem cell research also, and the treatments involved with it, like, they're unproven and they have a lot of high rejection rates. Just continuing with that, it involves the destruction of blastocysts formed from the lab. For those who believe that life begins at conception, the blastocyst is a human life, and to destroy it is unacceptable and immoral. A similar theological problem is an idea of creating living tissue in a lab and whether that represents humans taking on the role of God. And some people even argue that stem cell research can lead to the cloning of humans, which people don't agree with that either. This just gives a recap of what I just talked about. Now, middle ground. Can we avoid moral dilemma? It's important to realize that although people may have strong opinions on what is best for society, groups on both sides of the discussion are interested in helping and protecting human lives, especially in this scenario. Understanding this can greatly help people to respect each other's differences and opinions and work to find the middle ground. My opinion on this, can we avoid moral dilemma? I don't think that there's a certain or correct or perfect way or an absolute way to avoid moral dilemmas altogether. At the end of the day, people are going to have strong opinions, especially on subjects like this where it's really controversial. You can give your facts, but they can give them right back, and if you try to make your arguments subjective, then they can do that right back as well. And my thoughts on this. I just wrote a little paragraph, I'll just read it. I think stem cell research is a great way to combat diseases in a safe and effective way and further our knowledge in medicine to save more lives. However, there are some issues for me surrounding embryonic stem cell research. Knowing that embryonic stem cells can be easily manipulated compared to adult stem cells, using these cells could lead to further unknown problems with the immune system of adults, because they can reject the embryonic cells and attack them as unknown invaders, like I talked about. But my main issue with it is, which this has happened before, if you've heard of My Sister's Keeper, this is what it's based off. If a parent uses a baby as means to an end, which means that a mother could birth a first child that ends up with the life-threatening disease, and she decides to have another child just to use its stem cells as a match for her first child, I just think that's wrong, and I don't agree with it. I think that stem cell research should only take place under certain federal laws. I pretty much agree with Bush's stance on it. I don't like that there's no restriction. I think that there should be some more restrictions. If there's potential for a child or mother to have a very serious illness or disease, then I think it's okay. If there's little potential for a serious or critical disease or illness, then it shouldn't take place. And these are my sources. I really hope you enjoyed this topic, and I hope you have a better understanding of it now and a better opinion.